Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here, bringing you my review of the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery, Far From Home. As usual, the first part of this review will be spoiler-free, and I'll get into spoilers in the second part of the video, but I'll give you a warning before I do so. So to start with, I have to say I think Star Trek is at its strongest when it's featuring strong character moments, and this episode has no shortage of those. I really do appreciate a lot of the character work that's done, and every character that's featured in this episode gets at least one or two moments to really shine and really have an interesting character moment to play and to do something with on screen, which I really do appreciate. A number of the questions that were asked last week with regards to the status of various characters and kind of what's going on in that arena get answered in this episode, and we see a lot of those pieces kind of filled in with a strong episode that features many of the characters that I absolutely love from Star Trek Discovery. So yeah, I was definitely a big fan of this episode. Once again, gorgeous vistas and beautiful cinematography. I think there's some really great shooting in this episode. The writers of this episode and the director are the same as the previous episode, and apparently they were shot pretty much simultaneously or back to back. So that really comes across here, that kind of continuity of storytelling that I really, really appreciate. Director Olatunde Osunsanmi has kind of toned down his directorial tricks in this one, and it's shot in a much more straightforward way than a lot of his episodes have been over the past few years of Discovery. There's a bit of shaky handheld stuff going on, but nothing like the kind of crazy camera moves that he's kind of known for a number of his episodes. So for better or worse, though, I really liked how this episode was shot. So once again, top marks for this episode, I think very much on par with my enjoyment of last week's episode as well. So with that said, let's get into the spoilers now. If you don't care about spoilers, by all means, keep watching. If you haven't yet watched the episode, though, you might want to wait until you've seen it. So the episode begins by showing us what's been going on with the Discovery crew. They, of course, were absent in the last episode, and their fate was unknown. In this one, we see Discovery arriving in what we presume to be the 32nd century and crashing on an unnamed glacial planet. This whole sequence of Discovery crashing, I think, was beautiful, and the action was very, very well done. The acting really helped to communicate that idea of danger and this emergency situation. Add to that the fact that Saru's turn as the captain of Discovery, the commanding officer at the moment, he has the potential to become one of my favorite captains. He really does a great job in the center seat, delegating authority and leading his people. Some kind of inspirational moments that he has, I really, really enjoyed, including going toe-to-toe with Georgiou a couple of times and kind of reining her in. Georgiou is kind of a loose cannon in this story. She's a little bit of an agent of chaos, and I definitely predict she's going to be a lot of trouble this season. That said, a lot of what she does in this episode does help them get out of a sticky situation, although her methods are, of course, a little bit more brutal than the Starfleet method of doing things. And yeah, I definitely predict she's going to be a lot of trouble for Saru. But Saru, of course, post-Vaharai, no longer has that fear response. He really does step up and, like I said, goes toe-to-toe with her and, you know, is a good match for her. And she does back down, although I think it's more of a to-be-continued situation than having been completely cowed by Saru. Like I said, all of the characters get something interesting to do here, even some of the more secondary characters that we haven't seen a lot of. Commander Nan, for example, joined the crew last season from the Enterprise, and we get a lovely little scene where she talks about why she has joined the Discovery crew and not remained back on the Enterprise. And it really comes down to Arium and the sacrifice that Arium made, with Nan feeling that that sacrifice should be matched, kind of a life for a life type thing, with Nan taking her place basically on Discovery going to the future. So I thought that was really interesting, especially, you know, given that Nan had a hand in ending Arium's life. at the request of Arium. She was wanting it to happen, but Burnham, of course, was trying to find a way to save Arium's life, but Non was the one who hit the button to open the airlock that killed Arium. So yeah, it's an interesting little bit of kind of back and forth there, and I really like that they're doing something interesting with that character. One of the big questions of the episode is Lieutenant Detmer. She undergoes a trauma that apparently medically there's nothing wrong with her, there's no concussion or anything like that, but she seems to be kind of out of it and not responsive in a lot of situations. There's a lot of theories on the internet as to what this might be about. I have a few thoughts. I'm not totally sure. It does, I do have to say, remind me of how Arium was acting last season when she had control kind of infecting her implants. Detmer, of course, also has cybernetic augmentation. So is there a connection there? I'm not sure. It's a little too early to say at this point, but it's obvious they are setting something up for her character, and I'm really curious to see where that goes. Other great character interactions come between Culber and Stamets. We see the kind of resumption of their relationship, and it's really great to see Culber kind of more of the joking type person that we saw earlier in, season 1. We haven't had that since he came back in season 2, and it does seem that his talk with Admiral Cornwell last season and, the subsequent events in the relationship between him and Stamets have really helped him to get over a lot of those issues, and it's really great to see those two interacting the way they do. Paul Stamets, of course, having some difficulties with the horrific injuries he suffered at the end of last season, and that's continuing to be an issue. His interaction with Jet Reno, I think, is definitely a winning combination ever since we saw them last season kind of bickering. The writers have doubled down on that, and putting those two together was absolute gold in this episode. I really appreciated all the scenes they had together. Tig Notaro as Jet Reno is just a treasure, and I'm so glad they have her on Discovery this season as well. Terrific character and just a lot of fun to watch on screen. Tilly was also a really bright spot in this episode. Sometimes I felt that towards the end of season 2, they were relying on her a bit too much for comic relief. In this episode, I feel a lot more depth from her. She's nervous and a little out of her element, but Saru, being the terrific commanding officer he is, has this way of kind of drawing her out and encouraging her and not shaming her for the way she's behaving, and kind of calming her nerves and helping her to realize that she has a lot to offer. I love the line where Saru says, we're introducing ourselves to the future, and you, Ensign Tilly, are a great first impression. And just like that was moving, and it was really great to see the effect that had on Tilly and how it gave her the confidence to kind of proceed. We have to remember she's a very green ensign. She's been through a lot of situations on Star Trek Discovery, but she's just fresh out of the academy, very young ensign, and being thrust in a situation that is beyond the experience of most Starfleet officers, most of the veterans. She's got to grow up really fast, and I think they're doing some interesting things with her story here. The villain of the episode, Zara, I think that was how we pronounced his name. He's an interesting one, and I like this kind of environment where these kind of petty criminals have been allowed to flourish because the Federation isn't around to kind of ride herd on them. And he was an interesting one, kind of having grabbed his little bit of power, but also there's a vulnerability there. I love when Giorgio comes in and kind of points out that, he's maybe not as powerful as even his own people think that he might be. And there's, a way to undermine him there. He played it brilliantly. I liked that he had a really big vocabulary, and Giorgio just kind of picking at that, saying, that doesn't prove that you're any kind of great mind. It proves you have a thesaurus. I thought that was a fun moment, but excellently played. I think he was played really well. I have a feeling he might be back. I don't know. It feels like this would be a character they might bring back at some point. And I think he would be a really welcome return. I really appreciated how he was played here, so I think it would be interesting to see him again. The Corridanites that the crew encounters at this colony, I thought it's great to bring back legacy Star Trek species. Corridan, the mention goes way back to the original series episode, The Journey to Babel, and we finally saw this species in Star Trek Enterprise. So yeah, very cool to bring back some of these lesser known legacy species once again. Some interesting things in this episode as well. We get the villain Zara referring to the Vidraish, which, as we know from the Short Treks episode Calypso, is kind of a bastardization of the name the Federation. So yeah, more links to that Short Treks episode. So, I really do think they're going to connect that into continuity somehow and explain the whole situation that we got in Calypso. I'm really curious to see how that all links up. I really do think they must have some kind of plan to make that all fit. So I'm excited to find out what that is. If you listen to our episode of Positively Trek that's coming out on Monday, our episode review of this episode of Discovery, you'll hear a sort of theory I have as to how that might happen. It's one I've talked about before. It still fits. I think it might be how they connect those. But yeah, I'm curious to see how that all turns out. So the very end of the episode, of course, we get the reappearance of Burnham as she rescues Discovery from the ice on this planet. And it turns out that she has been waiting for a year for Discovery. So, Discovery popped out of the wormhole a year after Burnham. So I'm assuming in the next episode we'll kind of get what happened in the interim, what Burnham has been up to for that year with Book. And I'm excited to get that kind of backstory to see what kind of progress she has made in kind of bringing the Federation back together. So yeah, definitely looking forward to that. And of course, very curious to see where the rest of the season goes from there. So yeah, as usual, I want to hear from you. What did you think of this episode? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, of course, as always, to the Patreon supporters for their help in bringing this episode to you. I really do appreciate it. Could not do it without you. Thank you to everyone else for just watching these videos. It's really literally the best thing you can do to help out the channel. But if you feel compelled to do so, please like and share the video with anybody you think might enjoy it, and subscribe to Kertrats Productions if you haven't already. We've got a weekly live show where we talk about the newest episode of Star Trek, whether that's Discovery or Lower Decks or Picard when that comes back, or Strange New Worlds or Prodigy, or any of the myriad of new shows that are coming. So looking forward to all of those discussions. I will see you in the next video. Until then, as always, live long and prosper.